Welcome back to the Unstuck movement. I'm your host, Rob Z. Today, we have the incredible Kristal DeSantis with us on the podcast. And Kristal, I'd love to jump in right off the bat with a powerful question to get right to the heart of what we're talking about. And when I was preparing for this episode, you gave me a quote that you love, a life lesson that had a big impact and something that you live by. That a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, from Lao Tzu. So I'm curious, on your journey, what was that single step that began your journey for what you're doing today?
Ooh, gosh, a single step. I think this is where I love this quote so much, is because when things feel daunting, just reminding yourself that all you have to do is take that one little step. And so I guess if I'm thinking back, it might have been, okay, so this is where this is going to go. I was on Match.com. I was dating, and I sent a single wink to the guy who is now my husband.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so that single wink led you on a journey to what you do now today. So you have a book out. It's called Strong, a relationship field guide for the modern man. So I'm really excited to understand how this man in your life that you sent a wink to on Match led to you writing this book and to helping millions of men across the world. Before we get there, I just want to welcome everybody to the platform. The Unstuck movement was created to help you break the chains that are holding you back in your personal life and your professional life. And these are true testimonies of breakthrough. So people I bring on the show have had real breakthrough in their life, because I want to have real examples for you that breakthrough is also possible for you in anything that you're going through. We're sponsored by the Connected Leaders Academy. Check out connectedleadersacademy.com. Over 450 heart-centered servant leaders from around the world who want to connect with you. And also, I'd love to encourage you, if you want to be the authority at what you do, if you want to be the expert in your field, make a lasting impact on people's lives, and create incredible connections with people in your industry, I urge you to check out the Pro Podcaster Academy. Join the waitlist right now at RobZWentz.com. Kristal DeSantis with us today is a licensed marriage and family therapist specializing in relationships, trauma, and men's mental health. She developed the Strong model of relational therapy and authored the book Strong, a relationship field guide for the modern man. How did that single step with this guy on Match lead to this book and what you do today?
So before I became a marriage and family therapist, I was just, working I had a PR and communications degree. So I was working in a real estate company. And I was not really dating. So kind of backstory, I grew up in Asia. I grew up in a different culture. I moved to the US to go to college. And I was really intimidated by American dating culture. Honestly, I was like, I don't know how to do this. This is very unfamiliar to me. And I went to an all women's college. So I kind of just stayed like an outside observer. I was like, okay, so this is all very complicated, this whole dating game. I don't quite get it. What I do know is education. So I really just dedicated myself to getting my education. I double majored and graduated and went out into the workforce, and dating was kind of the last thing on my mind. I was like, I assume it'll happen eventually. I don't know. I had this idea that one day, I guess, marriage happens to everybody at some point. It just, I don't know. TikTok,
just kind of happens.
It just happens. I don't know. I really just didn't give it that much thought. That was not something I was really interested in. And then my younger sister got married. And this is something about, maybe it happens in lots of different cultures, but definitely in Asian culture. Kind of there's this idea that, the oldest sibling gets married first, and then you kind of, there's like a little bit of an order to it. So my younger sister kind of hopped the line, which is totally fair because she was interested in dating and relationships and I was not. But after she got married, there was a little bit of kind of spotlight on me, like what's going on over there? My mom was asking me like, what's happening? So I was like, shoot, well, I guess I better figure this out. And I got a boyfriend. I just, met a guy. And I realized I don't know anything about being in a relationship. Zero, right? I had not dedicated any time, any energy into honing my romantic relational skills. And of course, I had a lot of friends, but I realized, like, when it came to interacting with somebody of the opposite gender who I was attracted to, I grew up in a family of mostly girls. I went to an all women's college. And so I was just like, I don't understand men at all. I don't understand. How do we do this? And so that, obviously, that relationship didn't work out. Like, I was totally unequipped. It only lasted a very short time. But after that is when I realized, oh, shoot, if I do actually want to get married, if I do actually want to have a healthy relationship one day, I better figure it out. I feel like there's clearly a knowledge gap lacking. So anyway, I'll pause there. That was kind of the background.
How is dating culture different in Japan?
Well, so also I'm not Japanese, right? So I was I'm a third culture kid. I was there, as an American. My dad is American. I'm, half Asian, but so I really just didn't engage in the Japanese dating culture, right? Japanese dating culture is very different. It is a little bit more, and of course, it's changed since I lived there. But there really isn't the same kind of dating culture as there is here, right? It's almost like when you are going to, or when you're ready to get married, that's when you then maybe start looking for somebody who you can marry. The dating culture as it is here, where you're like in high school and you've got a boyfriend, it wasn't really like that when I was growing up there. So
interesting.
Yeah, because I remember, I remember even when I moved to the States, and that's kind of where I realized, like, I don't know how to do this. I was working in, and a coworker, she was like, I went on a date with this guy last night. And I was like, who are his parents? And she was like, what? What? I was like, is that, I don't know. So then I was like, I don't know what's happening here. So I'm just going to stay out of it. Clearly I said something weird and I don't know what to do. So
that's really funny. Oh man. Interesting. So you start off on this journey of trying to figure out who you have to be able to date somebody and to build a positive relationship and to have the kind of relationship that you'd want to have. What did you find to be the most difficult thing along that journey? What was the biggest lesson that you had to learn in that?
It's the first chapter, the first section of the first chapter of my book, self-awareness. So I actually started by going to therapy myself. And, I was just kind of searching around and I ended up finding a marriage and family therapist. So I was like, I didn't even know that was a thing. I guess this is the person to go to talk about relationships. So I ended up working with a marriage and family therapist who, really just kind of held a mirror up to what I was bringing into the relationships, right? All of the stuff that, from my upbringing, my background, my experience growing up in my family with my parents who didn't necessarily have a healthy relationship, just how all of that impacted me and what that was doing to my approach to relationships, how I saw myself, how I saw others. So really that was the big other first step into having a healthy relationship, starting with self-awareness.
It's really interesting that somebody who was single trying to learn how to date was going to a family and marriage therapist, because usually you don't go to them until you have a family and you're married and things aren't going well, right? That's usually when you start going there, at least from my perspective. And so that's the foresight, number one, to be able to have that understanding is huge. And for you, self-awareness, right? A lot of people go through life and they never even dive into self-awareness. They don't even start to scratch the surface on this. How did you transition that to now you're writing a book for guys? I'm assuming because we are usually we're usually less self-aware than women are. Maybe I don't know if that's true across the board, but I feel like that's we're less vulnerable, less willing to be vulnerable, maybe more self-centered and less self-aware. How did you make that connection?
So honestly, the reason I wrote this book directed towards men is simply because, I mean, there are lots of unself-aware women out there as well. So, let's.
Yeah, I'm not saying there's not, but I think by and large guys are more unaware than women are. But I mean, that's just my opinion.
I would say maybe part of that is why I wrote this book directed to men, is that there are so many more resources already out there directed to women, right? So when I became a marriage and family therapist, right, I was working with couples, and that was something I just noticed, is that I love giving resources, right? So I know that there's only so much I can do in the room. And then after that, you kind of have to do your own work outside of the therapy office, right? So I'm always looking for resources, referrals, like, what can I offer this couple so that they can continue their work, on their own and maintain their progress outside of session. And I just found such a imbalance in the amount of resources that were accessible to women versus the amount of resources that were accessible to men. I mean, so much of self-help, relationship, self-awareness, like self-improvement advice is really directed to women. The stuff that's directed to men is often either physical, right? Physical fitness, or financial business advice. And there really just is a huge gap in relationship advice directed to men. All of that is really directed to women: relationship with self, relationship with children, relationship with partners. And so that's part of why, that's really the reason why, because originally I was going to write this book for couples. And then I was like, well, this is so imbalanced. Let me just throw men a bone here and like give them something to kind of even the playing field a little bit, because it's really unbalanced out there.
Yeah, very true. And it seems like the tide is shifting a little bit there. But at the same time, guys traditionally have been trained to like not think about these kind of things. So kind of opening up our eyes to be able to think about this stuff and to encourage us to find these things important and valuable for our lives is much needed. Do you find resistance from men in that? Well, actually, hold on. Let me go to the man in your life. Did you find resistance in your husband, maybe before he was your husband, in these sorts of areas, and that also encouraged you? Or what kind of guy is he?
No, actually, that's part of what kept me motivated on this path, right? Is that I met him and he had already been married and he was already a single father. So, he had been through a divorce, and after his divorce, he had gone to therapy. He had gone and done a lot of personal work. And so that was also where I was like, oh, shoot, like I'm not at this guy's level. Like I need to do my work. And so working with that marriage and family therapist and like really, and so that's also where I was like, okay, so this image, this stereotype that like women are always the more evolved ones, men are always kind of the ones that like, the stereotype that like men don't care, men want. It was the opposite in our dynamic. And so that's also what made me really kind of focus on, well, what are men saying? What are men needing? And again, not just the noise in social media, but what are actual men who are looking at improving their lives, who want to be fathers, who want to be leaders in their families, who want to have solid marriages? What are those guys looking for? So again, like any pushback I get is usually from people who really don't want healthy relationships with women, right? They want to amplify like, well, isn't it true that all women? I'm like, no, it's not. But also, if that's what you're looking for, that's what you're going to find. But obviously, the men that are resonating with my book, the men that come into my office are the guys that are proactive. They are not settling. They are saying, I know I deserve a healthy relationship and I'm not sure what's getting in my way, but I want to find out. I want to overcome. I want to get unstuck. I want to get to that next level of what I know I'm capable of. And so, I love that.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I've heard this many times from guys that I know personally, that women are all the same. It's all these like stupid stereotypes. And I'm like, well, obviously that's not true. These things of like guys who like, it seems like they've really idolized this whole lone wolf mentality, that they're on their own and they just love that, and this is who they are. And it's just, to me, it's honestly sad. But at the same time, I get why guys fall into these patterns. But to break these patterns, it comes to self-awareness, like you said. Like, you're not going to find the right person until you're the right person to find the right person. Because you could find the right person, but if you're not who you need to be, they're not going to be who you need them to be. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
What qualities did your now husband have? Like you said, you met him, he was divorced, he had a kid. What qualities did he have that attracted you to him, that set him apart from other guys?
I mean, so my book, which is Strong, right? It's the Strong model. I break it down. It's an acronym for what I call the 6 pillars of a healthy relationship, right? And so the S is for safety. And that's what, again, I don't know that now it's maybe becoming more popular, talking about trauma and the importance of safety, the importance of emotional safety. But I think that's really what he provided that I didn't even know I needed until I experienced what it felt like to be safe with a man, right? Especially as a woman in the world, you're kind of raised to be on guard all the time, raised to be a little self-protective, which, is sometimes important, right? Yeah. But that he had self-awareness, he had stability, right? And it wasn't just financial. That's not, he had kind of the internal stability of, he was a single father. He had to get his daughter to school. He had to know how to cook. There were some basic life skills. I just remember going over to his apartment for the first time and looking in his fridge and being like, oh, look, there's food in here. It's not just beer and ketchup,
Right. Yeah.
So there was a level of stability that I was like, oh, this matches mine, because, I'm also proud of the fact that I'm stable in my life and, I can all of that. And then the other 2 pieces of safety, which I break down in my book, is self-regulation and self-expression, right? So he had the ability to self-regulate, he never got upset, or if he got upset, he would never raise his voice at me. He was always able to express himself, even if we disagreed, in a way that was calm and respectful and articulate, that made me think, and really, again, invited me to engage in a different way. And so that's where I was like, well, I have some self-regulation issues. I need to go figure out how I can regulate myself when I'm upset. And same thing with the self-expression, just, hurling your feelings at your partner is not really connecting, right? So so all of that is oh, so this is what it feels like to be with somebody who has the qualities that enable me to feel safe in a relationship. And I need to get there as well. And so that's really, again, he is a very traditional, he grew up in Texas, he went to the Marine Corps. He is now a fire captain. He is very traditionally masculine. And so that was also a piece of it as well. It's he really inhabited the protector, the provider, and the parent for his daughter that I admired. And yet he did it in a very different way. He wasn't protecting me by, starting bar fights every time we went out together, or he didn't pay all my bills. It wasn't like that. It was this totally different way of feeling emotionally protected, feeling, provided for, as far as I have the space to express my emotions, and, we have a partnership. And then of course he's an excellent parent. So all of those things.
Yeah, it's really, it's so important. And I believe personally, if you find a good man, it is a good woman behind him, or somebody in his life who has called him to be better, right? Somebody has to, and that's usually the woman in his life, whether it's his mom or it's his wife. But guys on their own, I think we were just designed this way as men and women. Guys on their own can't reach where they're supposed to reach without a good woman by their side. And vice versa. This is kind of how it goes, because a good woman is going to push a guy to be who he's supposed to be. And I think even through divorce, right? So he was divorced, but I'm sure that the woman that he was with before, she had called him to do certain things that he needed to do. And then he had a little girl. So that little girl, oh my gosh, I have 2 boys, but I can't imagine having a little daughter that would definitely push you to be a better man, because like it's always on your mind. I've got a little girl, I've got to watch after her, I've got to take care of her. So those things really gear you up to be the guy that you're supposed to be. So we're going to take a short break. When we come back in a little over 60 seconds, I'm curious, as we're talking about this, and maybe a guy's listening who isn't divorced, doesn't have a kid, doesn't have that experience. What could he do today to start start having those building blocks to be the person that would attract a good woman into his life? And what would that actually look like for him? So we'll talk about that in 60 seconds. Are you struggling to make consistent, valuable content for yourself? Do you want to have an efficient and effective way to create content that attracts the people that you want to connect with in life, the people you want to build relationships with in business? Do you want to be the go-to authority at what you do, at what you're great at? Would it be helpful for you if you had a platform that connects you to incredible people in your industry? The kind of platform that gets you leads and lands you clients without you having to beat down anybody's door or blow up anybody's inbox. Whether you're already creating content or you're desiring to start and it's something that's been kind of burning inside of you for a while, I urge you and encourage you to check out the Pro Podcaster Academy. Get started right now. Join the waitlist at RobZWentz.com.
Hi, my name is Jose Escobar, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Connected Leaders Academy. We're a growing tribe, a community of entrepreneurs all over the world globally. If you're an entrepreneur and you're looking to grow personally and professionally, scale your influence, develop your skill sets, move the needle in your business, more clients, more money, more profit, the bottom line, and of course, grow your circle and your network like never before, join the Connected Leaders Academy today. Check me out on Instagram and on Facebook, the @ JAESCO25. We look forward to having you join us. Take care.
So, Kristal, loving this conversation. So important to have. What can guys do? Maybe it's a single guy and he doesn't have what he needs to have to find the right woman. Where can he start? What should he do to build himself to where he needs to be?
Yeah. So, and I think this is going back to kind of what you said earlier about, the guys that say like, oh, I'm just a lone wolf, or, a guy that doesn't have the motivation to be the best version of himself unless there's a woman motivating him to do this. I think, again, a good partnership can really elevate you, right? It can help challenge you to be the best version of yourself, but also I guess I like to stay away from binaries, right? It's like either you're alone or you have a partnership that, is your purpose. Because this is something that, again, goes with the self-awareness is what I love. And, like you said, if you're single, go to see a marriage and family therapist. It's like, what can they do? Is honestly, it's start with getting a better relationship with yourself, right? That self-awareness piece. I have so many people who, again, there's this idea that when you are an adult, your childhood like magically disappears somehow. And like you become a fully formed human. And that's kind of the way I was operating of like, yeah, my childhood doesn't matter. I'm an adult now. Like when I, decide like magically I'll get the download of those relationship skills. I think it comes on like, I don't know, whatever birthday. And so realizing like that's not true, right? Having a healthy relationship with yourself, knowing what you're worth, knowing how to express yourself, knowing how to take care of yourself, that stability, knowing how to stand up for yourself, knowing how to self-regulate, take care of yourself. All of those things are going to put you in the best position so that when you do have a relationship, right, when you do find that person, you guys can be a power couple together. It's not going to be, okay, now I'm going to start getting my, stuff together, which is often where I see, again, with women, where they are frustrated, where they're like, no, I was ready to meet my partner. And now it feels like he's like, oh, shoot. Now I'm going to start learning relationship skills. And she's like, oh my God. And this is often where I see this like imbalance in heterosexual couples, right? Where it's like the woman is like, I have to be the pusher and the nag and the driver, constantly saying like, when are we going to get married? When are we going to have kids? When are you going to get that? When are you? And honestly, that I've never seen that dynamic work for anybody, right? It's honestly disempowering and disrespectful to the man, right? Because again, if we're talking about men who want to be leaders, that's not a dynamic that really speaks to that energy, right? And then for women who are like, I want to create a home, I want to focus on like, nurturing myself, nurturing my partner, focusing on the future. I don't want to have to like keep pulling my partner along. Like, that's not the dynamic I like either, right?
Yeah.
So that's where, I would say to any single guy, it's like, start now. Look at what you're doing well in your life, not only financially, not only like career wise or physically, which is often where a lot of men, it's like, I'll focus on this until a woman gives me a reason to switch gears. I'm like, no, you are your own reason to switch gears. Like, relationships happen all over the place, right? It's like even talking about the male loneliness crisis of, where are your friends? That's relationship skills. What's your relationship with your brothers, with your siblings, with your parents like? What are the relationships with your community like? Do you have the networks, not only of career networks, but of your friends that really make you feel connected and part of a community? All of those are relationship skills, right? You don't need a romantic partner to be motivated to do any of that. If anything, it's kind of going to put you behind if you wait for a romantic partner to do that. Because that's another thing I often hear is women are like, my husband doesn't have any friends, so he puts everything on me. And like, I'm like, get out of the house, sir. Like, do something. And all he does is work and all, and again, just, it's not healthy to not have a community. It's not healthy to not have people that you can reach out to. It's very healthy for your emotional health to get those relationship skills so that you can practice them, so that you can also be good at them when you do find the partner, right? You're not necessarily learning from scratch.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure to put all of your self-worth on one person, or a lot of pressure for you to like, they're the center of your universe and you have nothing else in your universe. It's a lot of pressure for somebody to have to handle, and it's unhealthy, honestly. Like you said, it's imbalanced. What do you feel? I'm very curious, because the term toxic masculinity has been big over the past couple of years. How do you view that as how has that affected men negatively, and what can they do about it?
I would say the conversation around it has really affected men negatively, right? Because so many men have heard it as masculinity is toxic, right? Which is not the right message at all, right? Masculinity, healthy masculinity is definitely a thing as well. But unfortunately, the language around, or the message around toxic masculinity has kind of drowned that out.
It's like every kind of masculinity is toxic, basically.
Right. And that's just not true, right? Yeah. But I do think that there is, and so this is the language that I prefer to use, which, again, there's lots of different ways of talking about it, but it's either like restrictive masculinity or immature masculinity, right? So kind of like a boy's idea of what a man is, right? So like a man is, got big muscles and drives a fast, cool car and got, tons of women hanging out with him. And like, he throws big parties every weekend. I'm like, okay, so that's like a teenage boy's idea of what a man is, right?
Yeah.
Which is, again, like, let's be honest, social media is often catered to, teenagers or the younger audience, right? Like that's the bulk of people who drive content. And so that's where I feel like a lot of the noise is about, like, honestly, like as an adult man, like looking at it, you're like, that's just immature masculinity. Like maybe I acted like that in high school, or maybe when I was in college, I thought that was what a man was. But no, as an adult man, like those are not the guys I look up to. Like my grandfather didn't act like that. The men in my life that I actually admire, that's not what they act like, right?
Yeah.
And so
that's really interesting. It's interesting you say that, because this makes sense to me now. Most media is geared towards young adults. Most media is geared towards teenagers and like 20-year-olds. And so they're portraying this one certain kind of man in media because that is attractive to the younger audience. But now it's blending over into all audiences because everybody's seeing that. So everybody gets kind of a warped vision of what a guy is supposed to be like.
Totally. And then there really just isn't. I mean, there are voices like you out there, but just, overwhelmingly, like you said, like that's what drives content. That's what drives the algorithms. That's what drives the market, right? Yeah. People are making money off of that kind of content. And so I think that's really where I always want to just go back to, like, restrictive masculinity is the idea that a man has to look a certain way, has to be a certain, has to work a certain type of job, has to, have these like specific markers. Otherwise, like, you've lost your man card. You're not a real man. And I'm like, well, that's so restrictive. Like, men come in all shapes and sizes and ages and, flavors. Like, so that's really where I'm like, where it's toxic is where it's narrow, it's restrictive, it's confined, it's, in some ways kind of stereotypic and objectifying and immature.
Yeah.
It's not expansive, it's not mature, it's not complex. So that's what I think, that's what's toxic about it, is nothing can grow when it's confined like that.
Well, I'm curious too. So just talking to women for a minute who might be watching or listening, how can they identify true healthy masculinity from toxic masculinity if they've been kind of warped by this whole toxic masculinity? I had trouble saying it. If they've been warped by this whole toxic masculinity mindset.
I think that's also where women need to be called a little bit into accountability, is because I've heard this from men, right? Or they're like, sure, that's all well and good, to say like, no, we love men for their personalities. But when it actually comes down to it, no, you don't. Like, you want the shiny guy with the rich car and so I think that's also where, I want to say, like I said at the beginning, is not all women are looking for healthy men either. Right. There are some women who just want the guy that supports their lifestyle or the guy that makes them look good. And so I think that's also something that I do want to acknowledge, is that, it's on both sides. There are definite immaturities. There are definite like toxic mindsets. But, when you get healthy, you will also find those people that are looking for healthy relationships. And ultimately what I find is that people that are looking for connection, not function. And that's also what I talk about in my book. There's really two types of relationships. There are relationships where people really want to connect on like the human level, right? We want our connection to be at the basis of our partnership. And there are people that are just looking for function. Are you hot? I'm hot. Can you pay my bills? You can pay, then those relationships, there's lots of those types of relationships, right? Where it's like about a function, but ultimately those are fragile because functions have end dates, right? It's like everybody gets old, people's jobs change, and also ultimately being a therapist, I'm like, at the end of the day, like, humans have a core need for connection. So often what I see is people that initially were okay being in function-based relationships ultimately end up feeling really lonely, right? Yeah. And so that's often where it's like, oh, shoot, can we get from a function-based relationship to a connection-based relationship? And if so, what does that look like? And, that's a lot of the work I do, is couples that come in and they're like, maybe we had connection in the beginning when we were 20 years old and we fell in love. And then, we realized it's been 15, 20 years and we haven't had a connected conversation. We've talked about kids. We've talked about vacations. We talked about holiday plans. We talked about budgets. I don't know who this person is anymore. Yeah. Right. So, yeah.
Yeah. And that honestly, that's where I think the later stage divorces come from, right? Because Absolutely. You've kind of forgot that, okay, the things that we focus on are all the external things that we needed to do to manage our life. And now that the kids are grown up and we're kind of in the later stages, we're like, oh, we actually don't even know each other. Maybe we never did know each other. And that I can imagine that being a very scary place to be. So connection comes down to communication, right? Communication is everything. What advice would you give couples who struggle with communication? And I've been through a divorce. So just to give you an example, kind of like your husband now, sounds like I was married, had a kid, got divorced, and was a single father for a couple of years, and then met a woman. And when I met her, I was much more of who I was supposed to be than I was before. You know what I mean? I went through this like growth process, and through that, learning how to communicate better. So when in my old relationship, it's like we couldn't hear each other. Like, she couldn't hear what I was saying. I couldn't hear what she was saying because the communication was so off. So what can you do in a relationship when that communication is that damaged to start to rebuild that?
So I think, one of the big things, like, this is kind of the main thing that brings people into couples counseling is conflict and communication issues, which, like you just named, those are the obstacles to the connection, right? And often when people are fighting, it's because they want to connect, but they don't have the skills and tools to do it. And so that's what I always want to validate is if the desire for connection is there, conflict and communication, those are skills you can learn. And they take practice. And often we have bad habits that are entrenched in our communication and conflict patterns that are either, from our childhood, from, the ways that we've learned to exist in the world, that, it's just really bad habits. And we don't have the skills and tools to do anything different. And so that's always what I want to say is that, ultimately, if I have a couple, no matter at what stage they're at, as long as they both want to get back to that level of connection, we can work on communication skills. We can work on conflict skills, right? That's repetition. That's practice. That's putting the reps in. And so I just like to reframe it like that. Like, hey, anyone can learn new skills. Right? It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter how long you've been married. If you want to learn new skills, if you want to get connected, just put in the reps, put in the work.
Yeah, reps and sets are everything. And going back to the beginning of this, you said about self-awareness. The real communication with somebody else begins with how you communicate with yourself. And from a spiritual level, in my personal experience, my relationship, my communication with God makes my communication with me better, which makes my communication with the people in my life better. And I think that one of the hardest parts of being able to communicate well with yourself is being honest with yourself and being open with yourself. So like what you do, marriage and family counseling, therapy is so important. Therapy and coaching to me and finding a great mentor in your life are some of the most important things you'll ever do, because you need a third party objective source. Going to your parents, going to friends, unless you have really bold friends or parents who are just going to tell you exactly how it is, they're usually going to cater to you. They're usually too deep into the thing. They know you too well to objectively see what's going on. And so I'm curious for yourself. So do you still go being a therapist? Do you still go to a therapist?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Awesome.
Like you said, you got to have those mentors. You got to have that reflection. You got to have that accountability, because exactly like you said, I mean, also your parents and your friends, they know a specific version of you.
Yeah.
Right. And that's part of sometimes the struggle of like breaking patterns in relationships is figuring out if you want to be a new version of yourself and presenting that new version in your partnership. Right. And that's often what gets people stuck is they're like, no, I already know who you are. Nah, you're that person. You're not going to change. Done. And so I think that's also something really important is, first of all, like you said, and I have this saying in my book as well, it's like, you can't tell your partner what you don't know about yourself. Right. And so if you're trying to communicate and you're asking, you're frustrated about something, that's also what I do as a therapist. I'm like, what is the actual message you're trying to send here? Like you're fighting about, I don't know, where the fridge goes. Is it really about that? Or is there something else? Is it about like, I don't feel heard. I don't feel seen. I never wanted to buy this house. And I don't feel you listen, whatever it was. But that getting down there and being able to put words to that experience. And that's where the self-awareness and the self-expression kind of, work together of like, first you have to know about yourself so that you can then express what you actually want to say so that your communication is actually leading to connection and not just, all right, we solved where the fridge goes. Why do I still feel upset? Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Because once the fridge is where it is, then it's the next thing. We're on to the next one. And I think this is a common theme in in this podcast. Integrity comes up over and over and over again. And I just define integrity as, are you keeping promises to yourself? Are you doing what you said you're going to do? And that builds your self-esteem, that helps to build your self-worth, and that builds your own personal integrity. So if you're always breaking promises to yourself and you have a bad relationship with you, how in God's name are you going to have a good relationship with anybody else? Because you're always going to think that they're lying because you're always lying to yourself. You can't trust anybody because you can't trust you. And it's that simple, but it's also easier said than done, right? It takes it takes work, discipline, and it takes great examples in your life to see like, oh, wow. You need integrous people in your life. You need to have them because you need somebody to point to of like, well, they're going to hold me to a certain regard. And I know we can do it ourselves, but I know just for me personally, it makes it so much easier when I have somebody to point to of like, okay, there's a great example.
Yeah. And, I talk about that in my book in the chapter R, which is respect, right? Is that so many men say like, I want to feel respected in my relationship. But like you said, when I turn it around and say, well, do you have self-respect? When you look in the mirror, are you living in alignment with your values, or are you constantly disrespecting yourself and then kind of offloading that burden onto your partner to give you the respect that you're not giving yourself, right? And so that's also, again, in a healthy relationship, it really does. Like, am I acting in alignment with my integrity? Can I look in the mirror and be like, that's a guy I can be proud of? And again, that's where you don't have to demand respect from your partner, because you will command respect, because people will then look at you and be like, that's a guy I want to be like.
Exactly. Yes. Because when you live that, it's weird how like leadership and authenticity, they are not something that somebody even consciously recognizes that they recognize or admire. It's like you're automatically attracted to it because that's what we all desire.
Exactly. And it is really that kind of, I guess, if you want to call it like more spiritual or intrinsic, or kind of that like core human level, that's what we're wired to be attracted to, right?
Yeah.
Like vulnerability, authenticity, integrity, like those are the things that just on a soul level, like we're all like looking for that.
Yeah, 100%. Really good. So as we come to the conclusion of this episode, I want to encourage people to check out your book. It's amazing. They can buy the book right now. Strong, a relationship field guide for the modern man. You can search for it. There it is. And if you're listening, just search for it on Amazon. Make sure you pick that up. Every guy needs to read this. And I feel like it benefits women too, right?
Yeah,
to understand men and the kind of man that they need to have in their life and what to look for, because we've been bamboozled into looking for the wrong things.
Totally.
And encouraging everybody once again, if you want to become the authority in your space and launch your platform, go to RobZWentz.com and join the waitlist. Kristal, this has been an awesome conversation. I love talking about this kind of stuff. Is there anything that you want to leave the audience with before we sign off?
I think I want to go all the way back to the beginning of just take that one little step. Sometimes it can feel so daunting of like, gosh, how did my marriage get here? Or where do I even begin? Just take one step, maybe one Google search, one click, get a book, one, listen to one podcast. Like it's the tiny things that add up over time. Yeah. So just take the one step.
I love it. Great advice. This is another true testimony of breakthrough. Until next time, this has been the Unstuck Movement. Oh,